My name is Nina Reeves and I am 30 years old. On a Tuesday afternoon in February, a man named Gerald Watts called my personal cell phone to report a broken boiler. He was polite, apologetic about the inconvenience, and very clear about why he was calling me specifically. He said he had looked up the contact information on his lease. He said my name was listed as the property owner. He gave me the address, a 3-bedroom rental in the East Side neighborhood of the city, and waited for me to respond. I had never been to that address. I had never seen that lease. I did not own that property. I had never owned any property. I was a 29-year-old property manager earning $3,200 a month working for a man named Elliot who had hired me 2 years earlier and who had spent those 2 years building, I would soon discover, an entire real estate operation on the foundation of my identity. My name was on 14 properties. My professional license number, the property management license I had studied for, paid for, and maintained through 40 hours of annual continuing education, was listed on every single lease as the licensed property manager of record. My signature appeared on documents I had never touched. I told Gerald Watts I would look into the boiler situation and call him back. I hung up. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the coffee shop where I had taken the call, and I looked at the steering wheel for approximately 3 minutes without seeing it. And then I opened my notes app and I typed one sentence. Everything. From the beginning. Document all of it. Before I tell you what I found and what I did about it over the next 4 months, tell me where you're watching from right now. Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Subscribe to Karma Archives before we keep going, because what I built in those 4 months is the kind of story that doesn't exist yet in the way it needs to, and every person who has ever had their identity used without their knowledge needs to hear how this ended. Now let me take you back 2 years, to the job interview that started all of this. I was 27 when I interviewed with Elliot. I had just completed my property management certification and was looking for my first position in the industry. Elliot ran what appeared to be a small but successful property management firm, Crane Property Solutions, with a portfolio he described as boutique but growing. He had an office downtown, a professional website, a LinkedIn profile with a reasonable number of connections, and a manner in the interview that I found reassuring in the way that people with 20 years of industry experience can be reassuring when they are trying to be. He told me the role was straightforward. I would manage day-to-day tenant relations, handle maintenance coordination, conduct property inspections, and assist with lease renewals. He needed someone with a license because regulations in our state required a licensed property manager of record on all residential leases. He said the portfolio was currently 8 properties with plans to grow to 15 over the next 2 years. He offered me $3,200 a month with a promise of salary review at 12 months. I accepted. I was 27, and it was my first real position in the field, and $3,200 a month felt like a foundation I could build from. What I did not know, what I could not have known from the outside, was that Elliot was not running a property management firm. He was running a scheme. The properties in his portfolio were not properties he had been hired to manage on behalf of owners who trusted him. They were properties he had acquired control of through a combination of long-term lease agreements, owner neglect, and in several cases arrangements with owners who were elderly or out of state and had essentially handed him the keys in exchange for a monthly check and freedom from oversight. He had then released those properties to tenants at market rates, pocketed the spread between what he paid the owners and what he collected from tenants, collected management fees that he billed to the property owners but did not report, and built an operation that generated, I would eventually calculate, approximately $22,000 a month in income that existed nowhere in any official accounting. And he had needed a licensed property manager of record to make the leases legally valid. That was me. I had spent 2 years coordinating maintenance calls, conducting inspections, responding to tenant emails, and processing lease renewals, all legitimate property management work, without understanding that the legitimate work I was doing was functioning as cover for everything happening in the financial layer underneath it. I knew Elliot handled the financial side. I knew he dealt directly with property owners. I had assumed, in the way that employees assume things about the business operations they are not directly involved in, that the financial structure of the firm was as it appeared to be. It was not. And Gerald Watts's phone call was the moment I found out. The afternoon of Gerald's call, I drove to the county recorder's office. Our state makes property records publicly searchable online, but I wanted the physical documents. I wanted to see the original filings, the signatures, the dates, the exact language of what had been recorded in my name. I told the clerk I was looking for records associated with my property management license number and my name. She searched the database. She printed the results. 14 properties. Across 4 neighborhoods in the city. Leases, management agreements, and in 3 cases recorded documents that listed me as the responsible party of record in ways that went significantly beyond what a property manager's license should authorize. My license number appeared on documents that only a property owner or designated owner's representative should sign. My name appeared in positions of legal responsibility I had never agreed to occupy. I sat in my car in the recorder's office parking lot and I read through the documents 3 times. I was looking for my actual signature. Across 14 sets of documents, I found it twice on documents I recognized as legitimate management agreements that Elliot had asked me to sign in my capacity as the licensed manager. The other signatures, the ones on leases, on owner authorization forms, on the 3 documents that went beyond my license's scope, were not mine. They were reasonable approximations of my signature, the kind that pass a casual inspection by someone who is not looking closely. Elliot had been signing documents with my name for 2 years. I drove home. I called my mother, which I do when I need to organize my thoughts by talking to someone who will listen without interrupting. I told her what I had found. She was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "Nina, you need a lawyer before you do anything else." My mother has worked in healthcare administration for 30 years and understands institutional processes better than most people I know. She was right. I called an attorney named Diana Park the following morning. Real estate law, licensing disputes, professional fraud. She had been recommended to me by a colleague who had worked with her on a landlord-tenant dispute the previous year and described her as someone who asked 3 questions and then knew exactly what needed to happen. She picked up on the second ring. I told her what I had found. She asked 3 questions. How long had the arrangement been in place? Whether I had any documentation of what my actual job responsibilities had been, and whether I had reported anything to the state licensing board yet. I said 2 years. I said I had 2 years of emails, inspection reports, maintenance logs, and tenant communications on my work computer. And I said no, I had not contacted the licensing board yet. She said, "Don't contact the licensing board yet. Don't contact Elliot. Don't tell anyone at the firm what you found. Give me 48 hours to review the property records, and then we'll talk about the sequence." I asked her why the sequence mattered. She said, "Because your license is at risk right now. Your name is on documents you didn't sign for actions you didn't authorize. If you go to the licensing board first without a complete picture of what happened and evidence that you were the victim and not a participant, the board will open an investigation into you, not just him. The sequence protects you. Understand?" I said I understood. I went back to work the next day. I sat at my desk across the office from Elliot Crane, and I answered tenant emails and coordinated a plumbing repair at one of the properties and ate lunch at my desk and said good morning and good afternoon and discussed a lease renewal on a 2-bedroom unit in Westfield, and the entire time I was performing the ordinary choreography of a workday while the knowledge of what I had found sat in my chest like a weight I was not yet allowed to put down. If you've ever had to act completely normal while holding information that changes everything, you know what that day felt like. Drop a comment and tell me how you handled it. And subscribe to Karma Archives if this story is hitting close to home, because what Diana told me in our second call is the part that turned everything. Now back to the 48 hours Diana had asked for. Diana called me back on a Thursday morning. She had pulled all 14 property records, cross-referenced them with the state licensing database, contacted a colleague who specialized in identity fraud in professional contexts, and built a preliminary picture of what had happened and what the exposure looked like. She said, "Nina, what Elliot has done involves at minimum 3 separate categories of legal violation. The first is identity fraud, using your name and license number on documents without your authorization. The second is professional license fraud, misrepresenting licensed authority to property owners and tenants. The third is financial fraud, collecting management fees and rental income under arrangements that were legally constituted using your identity without your knowledge or consent." She paused. "The good news is that the documentation trail is extensive and the evidence of your non-involvement is strong. Your actual work product, the emails, the inspection reports, the maintenance logs, establishes clearly what you did and did not do. None of it involves the financial layer of the operation. And the signatures on the documents that exceed your legitimate authority are demonstrably not yours. We've already had a handwriting specialist look at 3 samples, and the assessment is clear." I asked what we needed to do. She said, "We file a complaint with the state licensing board, but we file it proactively, with the full evidentiary package, positioning you as the victim of license fraud and requesting emergency protective status for your license while the investigation proceeds. Simultaneously, we file a criminal complaint with the county fraud unit. And we notify the property owners." I asked about the property owners. She said, "The property owners are victims too. They've been paying management fees to a firm that was using an employee's identity without her knowledge to legitimize documents. When they understand what happened, most of them will want to reclaim direct management of their properties. Some of them will want a new manager they can trust. That's an opportunity, but only if you move in the right sequence." I asked what the right sequence was. She said, "Licensing board first. Criminal complaint second. Property owners third. In that order. The first to establish that you are a victim and a credible professional. The third is where your future is." I told her to move forward. The licensing board complaint was filed on a Monday. Diana had prepared a 68-page package, every document from the county recorder's office, the handwriting specialist's assessment, 2 years of my work emails demonstrating the scope of my actual responsibilities, A timeline of every document bearing my forged signature, and a sworn statement from me describing the full history of my employment and what I had and had not authorized. The board opened an emergency review within 48 hours. They placed a protective hold on my license, which meant it could not be suspended or revoked during the investigation, and simultaneously issued a notice to Crane Property Solutions requesting all records related to my license number. The criminal complaint was filed the following Wednesday. The county fraud unit assigned an investigator within a week. His name was Detective Huang, and he had a manner so methodical it was almost calming. He asked questions in a precise sequence, wrote everything down, and confirmed at the end of our first meeting that what I had described constituted multiple counts of identity fraud and professional license fraud under the state's criminal code. And then, on the Friday of that week, I drove to meet Elliot Crane. Not at the office. At a coffee shop near the office, a public place, which Diana had specified. Not to confront him. Not to give him any indication of what was coming. I told him I needed to discuss some concerns I had about a property management agreement that seemed to exceed my authorized scope. I want to be precise about why I did this, because I know it sounds counterintuitive to meet with the person who had been defrauding you for 2 years rather than simply letting the legal process run. Diana had advised it for a specific reason. She wanted his response on record, not a legal record, a personal one. She wanted me to observe how he reacted when the topic of my license's use was raised directly, because that reaction would tell us something about whether he understood the exposure he had created and whether he was likely to try to manage it in ways that might affect me before the investigation surfaced everything. I sat across from Elliot Crane at a corner table in a coffee shop, and I told him I had been reviewing some of the property records and had noticed my name appearing on documents that seemed to go beyond what my license authorized. I said it calmly, professionally, with the specific neutrality of someone raising a compliance concern rather than making an accusation. He looked at me for about 4 seconds. Then he said the thing that told me everything I needed to know about his understanding of what he had done. He said, "Nina, those documents are standard in this industry. Your license covers them. Don't worry about it." He was not confused. He was not alarmed. He did not ask which documents I meant or when I had reviewed them or what had prompted my concern. He gave me the answer of a man who had told this lie before, smooth, dismissive, calibrated to make me feel like the confusion was mine. I said, "Okay. I just wanted to flag it." I finished my coffee. I thanked him for the time. I went in my car and I called Diana and I told her exactly what he had said, word for word. She said, "Perfect. Noted. Now we wait." The wait was 6 weeks. 6 weeks during which I continued to go to work, to manage tenant relations, to coordinate maintenance, to do the legitimate job I had always done while underneath it all the licensing board investigation and the county fraud unit inquiry were running simultaneously. Diana kept me updated at each significant development, but instructed me to change nothing about my visible behavior at the firm. Any sudden change, a resignation, a shift in my work patterns, a reduction in availability, might alert Elliot and give him time to manage the situation before the investigations reached their conclusions. In week 3, the licensing board investigator called Elliot's office requesting the management agreements and financial records associated with my license number. Diana had told me this call was coming and had told me how Elliot was likely to respond. She said people in his position generally did one of 2 things when regulatory investigators came calling. They cooperated minimally and hoped the investigation stopped at the surface, or they panicked and made mistakes. She said either outcome was fine for us. Elliot did both. He provided some records and altered others. The investigator noticed the alterations because investigators who work in professional fraud cases know what altered documents look like and what the originals in the county recorder's database look like. The discrepancy became its own evidence. In week 5, the licensing board issued its preliminary findings. Elliot Crane's real estate broker license was suspended pending a full hearing. The suspension meant that Crane Property Solutions could no longer legally operate as a property management firm. The 14 properties under the firm's management were now in a state of administrative limbo. The tenants had valid leases, the owners had existing arrangements, but the licensed entity managing those arrangements no longer had a valid license. Diana called me the evening the suspension was issued. She said, "Now we talk to the property owners." We reached out to all 14 property owners over the following 2 weeks. Diana drafted the letters, professional, factual, not inflammatory. Each letter explained that the property management license of record on their property had been used without the named licensee's authorization, that a regulatory investigation was underway, that Crane Property Solutions' broker license had been suspended, and that the property owner should consider their options for management going forward. 9 of the 14 responded within a week. The responses ranged from shock to fury to the particular resigned frustration of people who had trusted someone with something significant and found out that trust had been systematically exploited. Several of them had questions about what had been happening with their management fees. Several of them wanted to understand their legal exposure. Several of them, after Diana had answered their questions and they had had time to process the situation, asked whether I would be interested in managing their properties directly. I want to be precise about what happened in those conversations, because this is the part of the story that people most want to know about and the part one want to be most careful describing. I did not solicit any of these owners. I did not pitch my services or suggest that they switch their management to me before they asked. I answered their questions, I described my actual work history with the properties, and I was honest about my background and my license status, which had been fully cleared by the licensing board once the investigation established my non-involvement. When they asked whether I was available, I said yes. 7 of the 9 who responded asked me to take over management of their properties. 7 properties. Direct management contracts. At rates I set myself, rates that reflected the actual value of licensed professional property management rather than the discounted arrangement I had been operating under as an employee. The combined monthly management income from those 7 contracts was more than double my previous salary. I gave notice at Crane Property Solutions on the last day of week 6. I walked into Elliot's office. He was still physically present at the firm, his license suspended but no criminal charges filed yet, operating in the liminal space that people occupy between the moment institutional consequences begin and the moment criminal ones arrive, and I handed him a 1-page resignation letter. Professional, clean, no explanation beyond what was legally required. He looked at the letter. He looked at me. He said, "Nina, we should talk about this." I said, "My attorney has advised me not to discuss the situation directly. She'll be in touch if anything requires a response." I walked out. I picked up my personal items, which I had moved to my bag over the previous 3 days so that nothing about my departure looked prepared. And I drove to my new office, a co-working space I had rented 2 weeks earlier in preparation, and I sat down at a clean desk with my laptop and my license and 7 property management contracts with my name on them. My actual name. Signed by me. Authorizing things I had actually agreed to authorize. It was the first time in 2 years that my name on a document meant exactly what it said. Elliot Crane was charged with 7 counts of identity fraud, 4 counts of professional license fraud, and 3 counts of financial fraud 6 weeks after I resigned. The licensing board revoked his real estate broker license permanently following the completion of their investigation. The state attorney general's office, which became involved when the scale of the financial fraud became clear, estimated that the operation had generated approximately $530,000 in undisclosed income over the period of my employment. I gave a statement to the county fraud unit. I provided Diana's full documentation package to the Attorney General's office. I answered every question asked of me by every investigative body involved in the case, because I had nothing to hide and because the more thoroughly the truth was documented, the more completely my own name was protected. The criminal case is ongoing. I won't detail what is still in process. What I can tell you is that the 7 property owners who chose to work with me have, in the months since my firm was established, referred me to 4 additional property owners and their networks. I now manage 11 properties. I have a business license in my name. I have a professional reputation that the people who know it built by watching what I did and how I handled it. I have no debt to anyone's deception. Every client I have came to me because of my work, my license, and my record, not because my name appeared on a document I never signed. I am 30 years old. I run a property management firm that is entirely and verifiably mine. And the most important thing I did to build it was not the 7 contracts I signed in week 6, or the licensing board complaint Diana filed in week 1, or any of the strategic decisions that came after Gerald Watts's phone call. The most important thing I did was write that sentence in my notes app in the parking lot of the coffee shop. Everything. From the beginning. Document all of it. Because documentation is not preparation for betrayal. It is the foundation of trust in yourself, in your own record, in the version of events that you lived rather than the version someone else was constructing around you. The moment I had the records in front of me, the moment I could see my name on 14 documents I had never signed, the moment I could compare the forged signatures to my actual one and know with certainty that I was looking at something wrong, that was the moment I stopped being a victim of the situation and became someone who could do something about it. That moment came from Gerald Watts calling about a broken boiler. But it could have come sooner. It should have come sooner. And the only reason it didn't is that I had not been asking the questions I should have been asking about how my license was being used from the beginning. So I want to say this clearly to anyone watching who works in a licensed profession, in real estate, in healthcare, in law, in any field where your professional license is a document that carries your name and your responsibility into situations you may not directly supervise. Know where your license number appears. Know what documents it is attached to. Check the public records associated with your name periodically. Not because you expect to find what I found. Because if you do find it, you want to find it on a Tuesday afternoon when you still have 4 months to fix it. Not after the damage is done. Your license is your professional identity. Protect it the way you would protect anything else that belongs to you. Leave a comment and tell me, have you ever found out that something with your name on it existed without your knowledge? Or have you ever worked for someone who turned out to be operating in ways you didn't fully understand? I want to hear it. Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story reached you somewhere real, subscribe to Karma Archives. Every day there is a new story. Women who found out, who documented, who moved in the right sequence, who came out on the other side with their names attached to things that were actually theirs. Your name is yours. What it's attached to should be your decision. We'll be here every day to remind you of that. Subscribe. I'll see you next time.